Sarah Martinez had always been different. Growing up in a small town in Texas, she was the girl who climbed the tallest trees, who never backed down from a fight, and who dreamed of serving her country while other kids dreamed of becoming movie stars. At 22, she stood 5 feet 6 inches tall with calloused hands from years of working on her family's ranch and eyes that held a determination that had been forged through countless challenges. The decision to join the military hadn't been easy. Her parents had begged her to reconsider, pointing to her acceptance letter from the state university, where she could study engineering on a full scholarship. Her younger brother, Miguel, had pleaded with her to stay, reminding her that she was the only family member who truly understood his struggles with dyslexia. But Sarah felt a calling that went deeper than personal comfort or family expectations. She wanted to prove that a girl from a working-class Hispanic family could excel in one of the most demanding environments in the world. The bus ride to Fort Jackson had been long and uncomfortable. Sarah had spent most of the journey staring out the window, watching the familiar landscapes of home fade into unknown territory. Around her, other recruits chattered nervously or sat in contemplative silence. She noticed the mix of backgrounds represented in their small group: city kids who had never held a tool, farm boys who looked like they could already handle military life, and everything in between. What struck her most was how young they all seemed, despite being roughly the same age. Perhaps it was because she had been working since she was 14, helping her father repair fences and manage cattle, that made her feel older than her years. When they arrived at the base, the reality of what she had signed up for hit her immediately. The drill sergeants who greeted them were intimidating figures whose voices could be heard across the entire reception area. They moved with a precision and authority that made it clear that the next several weeks would be unlike anything any of the recruits had ever experienced. Sarah watched as some of her fellow recruits visibly shrunk under the intensity of the initial processing, but she kept her shoulders straight and her expression neutral. The first few days were a whirlwind of medical examinations, paperwork, uniform fittings, and orientation briefings. Sarah adapted quickly to the early wake-up calls and the constant stream of instructions. She had been waking up at 5 in the morning for years to help with ranch work, so the military schedule felt natural to her. What didn't feel natural was the constant scrutiny from the drill instructors, who seemed to take particular interest in finding weaknesses in each recruit. It was during the third day that Sarah first encountered General Patricia Hawkins. The general was a legend at Fort Jackson, a career officer who had earned her rank through decades of exemplary service, and who was known for her uncompromising standards. At 55, she carried herself with an authority that commanded immediate respect. But there were whispers among the staff that she had become increasingly harsh with female recruits in recent years. Some said it was because she felt women needed to prove themselves twice as hard to earn respect in the military. Others suggested that her own difficult rise through the ranks had made her believe that only through extreme pressure could female soldiers develop the resilience they would need. Sarah first saw the general during a base-wide assembly where General Hawkins addressed all the new recruits about the standards and expectations of military service. Her speech was powerful and inspiring, focusing on honor, duty, and the sacrifices required to serve one's country effectively. But as the general's eyes swept across the assembled recruits, Sarah felt as though those steel gray eyes lingered on her for just a moment longer than necessary. There was something in that brief glance that made Sarah's instincts sharpen, though she couldn't quite identify what it was. The real training began in earnest during the second week. Physical fitness tests, obstacle courses, weapons training, and endless hours of drill and ceremony filled their days from before dawn until well after sunset. Sarah excelled in most areas, particularly in marksmanship, where her years of hunting with her grandfather paid dividends. She could field strip and reassemble her rifle faster than many of the male recruits, and her shooting scores were consistently among the highest in her platoon. But it was her performance during a particularly challenging obstacle course that first brought her to General Hawkins' direct attention. The course included rope climbing, wall scaling, crawling under barbed wire, and navigating a series of physical challenges designed to test both strength and problem-solving abilities. Sarah had approached each obstacle methodically, using technique rather than brute force to overcome challenges that left some of the larger recruits struggling. When she completed the course with the fastest time in her company, she noticed General Hawkins standing at the finish line with her clipboard, making notes. The praise from her drill instructors was brief but meaningful. Sergeant Rodriguez, a tough but fair woman who had served 3 tours overseas, pulled Sarah aside after the exercise. "Martinez, that was impressive work out there. You've got natural ability, but more importantly, you've got the mental discipline to use it effectively. Keep this up and you'll make an excellent soldier." The encouragement meant everything to Sarah, who had been working harder than she had ever worked in her life to prove herself worthy of wearing the uniform. However, she began to notice that while her performance was earning recognition from most of the training staff, General Hawkins seemed to view her success with something that looked like skepticism. During subsequent training exercises, Sarah became aware that the general was often present when her company was being evaluated, watching from a distance with an expression that was difficult to read. Other recruits began to notice as well, whispering among themselves about why the general seemed so interested in their training activities. The atmosphere in their barracks reflected the intensity of the training program. Recruits dealt with stress in different ways, some through humor, others through quiet determination, and a few through barely controlled anxiety. Sarah found herself naturally taking on a leadership role among her bunkmates, helping those who struggled with equipment maintenance, or offering encouragement to those who were having difficulty with the physical demands. Her roommate, Jennifer, was a soft-spoken girl from Oregon, who had joined the military to gain structure and direction in her life. Jennifer often confided in Sarah about her fears of not being strong enough to complete the program. "I don't know if I can do this, Sarah," Jennifer whispered one night as they cleaned their rifles before lights out. "Some of these exercises are just too hard. I feel like I'm holding everyone back." Sarah had looked at her friend with compassion, remembering her own moments of doubt during her first weeks working on the ranch when she was much younger. Jennifer, strength isn't just about how much you can lift or how fast you can run," Sarah had replied quietly, careful not to let their conversation carry to other bunks. "It's about getting back up every time you fall down, and you do that every single day. I've seen you push through things that would have made me quit when I was younger. You belong here as much as anyone else." These moments of connection with her fellow recruits became increasingly important as the training intensified. The drill instructors pushed them harder each week, introducing new challenges and raising the standards for acceptable performance. Sarah continued to excel, but she also began to notice patterns in how different recruits were being evaluated. There seemed to be unspoken expectations that varied based on gender, background, and physical appearance. While she tried to focus on her own performance and improvement, she couldn't help but observe that some recruits received more encouragement while others faced constant criticism regardless of their efforts. The first major test of their training came during the 4th week with a comprehensive field exercise that would last 3 days. The recruits would be required to demonstrate everything they had learned about combat skills, survival techniques, teamwork, and leadership under simulated combat conditions. Sarah felt confident about her preparation, having studied the field manuals extensively and practiced the required skills until they became second nature. The night before the exercise, General Hawkins visited their barracks for an unexpected inspection and briefing. She walked through the sleeping area with military precision, examining equipment and asking pointed questions about readiness and understanding of protocols. When she reached Sarah's bunk, she spent considerably more time reviewing the organization of gear and the condition of equipment than she had with other recruits. "Martinez," the general said in a voice that carried clearly through the barracks, "I understand you've been performing well in training exercises." There was something in the tone that made every other recruit in the area stop what they were doing to listen. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied, standing at attention beside her perfectly organized footlocker. "Good performance in controlled training environments doesn't always translate to success under real pressure," General Hawkins continued, her eyes fixed on Sarah with an intensity that felt almost personal. "Tomorrow's exercise will show us what you're really made of. I'll be watching your performance very closely." The general moved on to complete her inspection, but the message was clear to everyone in the barracks. For reasons that weren't entirely obvious, General Hawkins had singled out Sarah for special attention, and that attention didn't feel entirely positive. As the lights went out that night, Sarah lay awake wondering what she had done to earn such focused scrutiny from the commanding officer. She replayed every interaction, every training exercise, every moment where she might have said or done something to create a negative impression. Jennifer's whispered voice broke through her thoughts in the darkness. "Sarah, Why do you think the general is paying so much attention to you? The question that had been on everyone's mind was finally spoken aloud. Sarah considered her response carefully before answering. I don't know, Jennifer, but whatever the reason, I'm going to make sure my performance speaks for itself. I've worked too hard to get here to let anyone's opinion derail my goals. Even as she said the words, she felt a knot of uncertainty forming in her stomach. The upcoming field exercise would indeed be a test, but perhaps not in the way she had originally anticipated. The pre-dawn wake-up call came earlier than usual, and the recruits moved through their preparation routine with nervous energy. Sarah checked and rechecked her equipment, ensuring that everything was in perfect order. She had learned from her father that preparation was often the difference between success and failure, and she wasn't going to leave anything to chance. Around her, other recruits were making their own final preparations, some with visible confidence and others with barely concealed anxiety. As they assembled for the initial briefing about the field exercise, Sarah noticed that General Hawkins was present alongside the usual drill instructors and training officers. The general's presence at what was typically a routine training event suggested that this exercise carried more significance than usual. Sarah tried to push down her growing sense that she was walking into something more challenging than a standard training evaluation. The briefing outlined a complex scenario that would test every aspect of their training over the next 3 days. They would be operating in teams, facing simulated enemy encounters, navigation challenges, equipment failures, and leadership scenarios designed to reveal their true capabilities under stress. Sarah listened carefully to every detail, making mental notes about potential challenges and strategies for success. When the briefing concluded and the recruits began moving toward the training area, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find General Hawkins standing directly behind her, close enough that their conversation would be private despite the activity around them. Martinez, a word, the general said in a tone that made it clear this was not a request. Sarah followed the general a short distance away from the other recruits, her mind racing through possible reasons for this unexpected private conversation. I want to be very clear about something, General Hawkins began, her voice low but carrying unmistakable authority. I've been watching your performance throughout training, and while your scores are impressive on paper, I have concerns about whether you truly understand what military service requires. This exercise will show me whether you have what it takes to be a real soldier or whether you're just someone who looks good in controlled situations. Sarah felt a flash of confusion mixed with determination. Ma'am, I'm committed to proving myself worthy of serving my country. I understand that this exercise is important, and I'm prepared to give my best effort. The general's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes hardened slightly. We'll see, Martinez. We'll see. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing alone with questions swirling through her mind and a growing realization that the next 3 days would be about much more than demonstrating her training. The field exercise began before sunrise, with the recruits being transported to a remote training area that simulated combat conditions. Sarah found herself assigned to Team Alpha, a mixed group of 8 recruits that included some of the strongest performers from their company, as well as a few who had been struggling with various aspects of training. The team composition seemed intentionally challenging, designed to test leadership and teamwork under pressure rather than simply combining the most capable individuals. Team Alpha's first challenge involved navigating through dense forest terrain to reach a designated checkpoint while avoiding simulated enemy patrols. Sarah quickly established herself as a natural navigator, using skills she had developed during years of tracking cattle across her family's vast ranch property. Her ability to read terrain and maintain direction without constantly consulting a compass impressed her teammates and helped the group maintain steady progress toward their objective. However, as the team moved through the forest, Sarah began to notice something unusual about their exercise parameters. While other teams seemed to be following standard training protocols, Team Alpha was being presented with increasingly difficult scenarios that pushed beyond normal training boundaries. Their simulated enemy encounters were more frequent and complex. Their equipment experienced more failures, and their time constraints were tighter than what had been outlined during the initial briefing. The first major incident occurred during their second navigation exercise. The team had been moving steadily toward a checkpoint when they encountered what appeared to be a standard obstacle, a river crossing that required teamwork and problem-solving to overcome safely. However, when they reached the crossing point, they discovered that the rope system they were supposed to use had been damaged, leaving them with equipment that was inadequate for the crossing under normal safety protocols. Sarah assessed the situation carefully, remembering her grandfather's lessons about problem-solving under pressure. "We can't use the damaged rope system safely," she announced to her team. "But if we move upstream about 200 meters, there's a natural crossing point where the water is shallower, and we can use the buddy system to get everyone across safely." Her teammate Marcus, a recruit from Chicago who had been struggling with outdoor navigation skills, looked uncertain, but the instructions said to cross here. "Won't we get in trouble for deviating from the planned route?" "Sometimes following orders means finding a way to complete the mission safely rather than following a plan that puts people at risk," Sarah replied, drawing on lessons her father had taught her about leadership during ranch emergencies. "Our objective is to get to the checkpoint with all team members. This route will accomplish that goal." The team followed Sarah's suggested route and successfully crossed the river, reaching their checkpoint on schedule and with all members accounted for. However, when they reported their arrival to the monitoring station, the training officer's response was unexpectedly negative. Instead of acknowledging their successful completion of the task, the officer criticized their decision to deviate from the planned route and noted their failure to follow explicit instructions in their performance evaluation. Sarah felt a growing suspicion that Team Alpha was being evaluated under different standards than the other groups, but she pushed those thoughts aside to focus on the next challenge. The exercise continued with a series of combat simulations that tested their weapons training, tactical thinking, and ability to work together under simulated combat stress. Sarah's marksmanship skills and calm decision-making under pressure helped her team perform well in these scenarios, but each success seemed to be met with increasingly critical evaluation from the training officers. During the second day of the exercise, the challenges escalated significantly. Team Alpha was presented with a complex scenario that required them to secure a simulated enemy position while dealing with equipment failures, casualty evacuation, and time pressure. Sarah found herself naturally taking on a leadership role as the situation developed, coordinating her teammates' efforts and making tactical decisions based on her assessment of the evolving scenario. The mission appeared to be progressing successfully when disaster struck. Jennifer, Sarah's roommate and friend, suffered what appeared to be a serious injury during a simulated combat encounter. The injury looked real enough that Sarah's first instinct was to prioritize her friend's safety over the training exercise. She immediately called for medical assistance and began providing first aid, directing other team members to secure the area while she focused on Jennifer's condition. It was only after several minutes of genuine concern and medical response that Sarah realized the injury was part of the training scenario. Jennifer was an actor playing the role of a wounded teammate, and Sarah's response was being evaluated as part of the exercise. The realization left her feeling manipulated and off balance, particularly because the scenario had deliberately exploited her emotional connection to her friend. When the exercise evaluation was conducted later that evening, Sarah was criticized for allowing personal relationships to interfere with mission completion, and for failing to maintain proper priorities during a combat situation. The feedback stung because it seemed to penalize her for showing exactly the kind of care for fellow soldiers that she believed was essential to military service. She began to understand that she was being held to standards that seemed designed to create failure rather than measure competence. That night, as the teams prepared for the final day of the field exercise, Sarah overheard a conversation between two training officers that confirmed her growing suspicions. They were discussing Team Alpha's performance in terms that made it clear the team had been deliberately given more challenging scenarios and evaluated more harshly than the other groups. More disturbing was the revelation that these decisions were being made at the direction of General Hawkins, who was apparently testing specific theories about female recruits' capabilities under extreme pressure. Sarah felt a complex mix of anger, determination, and clarity as she processed this information. She realized that she wasn't simply being tested on her military skills, she was being used as a test subject in what appeared to be General Hawkins' personal experiment about women's suitability for military service. The general seemed determined to prove that female recruits would break under sufficient pressure, and Sarah had been selected as the primary subject for this demonstration. Rather than feeling defeated by this revelation, Sarah felt her resolve strengthen. She thought about her grandfather's stories of facing discrimination in the military during his own service, and how he had overcome prejudice through unwavering professionalism and exceptional performance. She thought about her parents' sacrifices to give her opportunities they had never had, and about the young girls in her hometown who were watching to see if someone like them could succeed in environments where they weren't expected to belong. The final day of the field exercise presented Team Alpha with their most challenging scenario yet. They were tasked with a complex mission that combined elements of reconnaissance, combat operations, and rescue scenarios, while operating under severe time constraints and with limited resources. Sarah could see that the scenario was designed to create failure. The parameters were beyond what could reasonably be expected from recruits at their level of training. However, instead of accepting the likelihood of failure, Sarah chose to approach the challenge as an opportunity to demonstrate leadership under impossible circumstances. She gathered her team for a brief planning session, acknowledging the difficulty of their mission while focusing their attention on achievable objectives and efficient use of their limited resources. "We all know this scenario is designed to be extremely difficult," she told her teammates honestly. "But that doesn't mean we can't find ways to succeed. We may not be able to complete every objective perfectly, but we can show them what we're capable of when we work together and support each other." Under Sarah's leadership, Team Alpha approached the final exercise with a combination of tactical intelligence and mutual support that impressed even the critical training officers. When equipment failed, they improvised solutions. When time pressure mounted, they prioritized objectives based on strategic importance, rather than trying to accomplish everything. When team members struggled, others stepped up to provide assistance without being asked. The culmination of the exercise involved a complex rescue scenario where Team Alpha had to extract simulated prisoners from an enemy compound while dealing with hostile forces, equipment limitations, and a ticking clock. Sarah coordinated the mission with a level of tactical thinking and leadership presence that drew obvious admiration from some of the observing training staff, even as she could see General Hawkins watching with an expression of increasing frustration. During the final phase of the rescue mission, Sarah made a decision that would later become legendary among the training cadre. When the planned extraction route became compromised and the team faced the choice between abandoning the mission or taking significant risks to complete it, Sarah chose a third option. She developed an improvised plan that used the team's diverse skills and available resources in creative ways that minimized risk while maximizing the chance of success. The plan worked flawlessly. Team Alpha successfully completed their rescue mission under circumstances that had been designed to ensure failure, and they did so without a single team member being casualties in the simulation. Their performance was so impressive that other training officers began gathering to observe the conclusion of the exercise, word having spread that something exceptional was happening with Team Alpha. As the exercise concluded and the teams were transported back to the main base for debriefing, Sarah felt a sense of quiet satisfaction mixed with anticipation. She knew that her performance had been exceptional under difficult circumstances, but she also understood that General Hawkins' evaluation would ultimately determine how her success was interpreted and recorded. The formal debriefing session took place in a large conference room with all the recruits, training officers, and evaluation staff present. Each team reported on their experiences and received feedback on their performance, with most teams receiving constructive criticism mixed with recognition for specific achievements. When Team Alpha's turn came, the training officer's report was notably positive, highlighting their innovative problem-solving, effective leadership, and successful completion of challenging objectives. However, when General Hawkins rose to provide the final evaluation of Team Alpha's performance, the atmosphere in the room changed noticeably. The general's expression was stern as she reviewed her notes, and her initial comments focused on technical violations of protocol and deviations from planned procedures rather than on the team's ultimate success in completing their missions. While Team Alpha did manage to complete their assigned objectives, General Hawkins began. Their performance raised serious questions about discipline, adherence to command structure, and ability to follow orders under pressure. Military service requires absolute adherence to protocol, and the tendency to improvise or deviate from established procedures represents a fundamental failure to understand military discipline. Sarah felt her teammates shift uncomfortably around her as the general's critique continued, focusing on perceived weaknesses rather than acknowledging their demonstrated capabilities. It became clear that regardless of their actual performance, General Hawkins was determined to frame their success as somehow inadequate or problematic. The general's critique culminated with a direct challenge to Sarah personally. Martinez, your tendency to prioritize personal judgment over following orders represents exactly the kind of attitude that makes female recruits unsuitable for military leadership roles. Your performance this week confirms my assessment that you lack the mental discipline necessary for military service. The silence in the room was absolute as General Hawkins delivered this verdict. Sarah could feel the eyes of every person in the room focused on her, waiting to see how she would respond to such a direct and public attack on her character and capabilities. In that moment, she realized that her response would be remembered long after the details of the field exercise were forgotten. Sarah stood slowly, maintaining perfect military posture as she faced General Hawkins directly. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady, carrying the quiet confidence she had developed through years of facing challenges that others thought she couldn't handle. Her response would change everything that happened next, though none of them could have predicted just how far the consequences would reach. Sarah took a measured breath before responding to General Hawkins' harsh critique. The room remained completely silent, with dozens of pairs of eyes focused on what would happen next. In that moment, Sarah drew upon everything her grandfather had taught her about dignity under pressure, and her father's lessons about standing up for what was right, even when it came with personal cost. Ma'am, with respect, I would like to address your assessment of my performance and leadership capabilities, Sarah said, her voice carrying across the silent room with quiet authority. During this exercise, my team successfully completed every mission objective under circumstances that exceeded standard training parameters. We did so without any team member being injured, and while demonstrating the kind of adaptability and problem-solving that real combat situations require. General Hawkins' eyes narrowed as Sarah continued, clearly not expecting such a direct response. Furthermore, ma'am, every decision I made prioritized mission success and team safety, which I understood to be the primary objectives of military leadership. If following orders means leading my team into unnecessary danger when safer alternatives exist, then perhaps the problem isn't with my judgment, but with orders that don't account for reality on the ground. The audacity of a recruit directly challenging a general's assessment created a tension in the room that was almost physical. Other recruits held their breath, training officers exchanged glances, and General Hawkins' face showed a mixture of surprise and growing anger. Sarah knew she was taking an enormous risk, but she also knew that some moments demanded courage, regardless of consequences. "You're out of line, Martinez," General Hawkins replied, her voice rising slightly. "This kind of insubordination proves exactly what I've been saying about your unsuitability for military service. You lack the discipline to accept legitimate criticism and the humility to recognize your own limitations." Sarah maintained her composure, drawing on the inner strength that had carried her through every challenge she had ever faced. "Ma'am, I'm not questioning the chain of command or the importance of following orders. I'm questioning an evaluation that seems to penalize success and punish the exact qualities that military leadership requires. If adaptability, problem-solving, and concern for team welfare are considered weaknesses, then I respectfully disagree with that assessment." The confrontation escalated when General Hawkins stepped closer to Sarah, using her authority and physical presence in an attempt to intimidate her into backing down. "Martinez, you have 30 seconds to apologize for your insubordination and accept my evaluation of your performance, or you can pack your gear and leave this base immediately. Your choice." The ultimatum hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah could see the faces of her teammates, some showing support and others displaying concern for her future. She thought about Jennifer, who had struggled so much with self-doubt, watching to see if someone could stand up to unfair treatment. She thought about the other female recruits who were dealing with their own challenges and discrimination. Most importantly, she thought about the kind of soldier she wanted to be and the kind of officer she hoped to become. "Ma'am, I won't apologize for performing my duties to the best of my ability or for standing up for my teammates when they deserve better treatment than they received," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was risking. "If that means I have to leave, then I'll leave knowing I maintained my integrity and my commitment to the values that brought me here." The silence that followed was broken by an unexpected voice from the back of the room. "Excuse me, General Hawkins." The voice belonged to Colonel James Morrison, the base training commander, who had been observing the debriefing from the back of the room. His presence hadn't been announced, and his decision to speak represented a significant intervention in what had become a very public confrontation. Colonel Morrison stepped forward, his expression serious but controlled. "General, I've been reviewing the exercise parameters and evaluation criteria for Team Alpha, and I have some concerns about the consistency of our training standards. Perhaps we should continue this discussion in a more appropriate setting." General Hawkins turned toward Colonel Morrison with obvious irritation at the interruption. "Colonel, this recruit has shown blatant disrespect for authority and demonstrated exactly the kind of attitude problems I've been documenting. This is a clear case for immediate dismissal." Colonel Morrison glanced at the assembled recruits and training officers before responding. "General, I think there are several factors we need to consider before making such a significant decision. The training exercise data shows some irregularities that warrant review, and Recruit Martinez's performance record has been consistently exceptional throughout her time here. I suggest we adjourn this session and continue our evaluation through proper channels." The intervention created a face-saving opportunity for everyone involved, but General Hawkins seemed reluctant to accept it. Her focus remained fixed on Sarah with an intensity that suggested this confrontation had become personal rather than professional. "Colonel, I won't allow insubordination to be excused because of political correctness or concerns about appearances. Standards are standards." "I agree completely that standards are standards," Colonel Morrison replied evenly. "That's exactly why I want to ensure that all our recruits are being evaluated fairly and consistently. General, I'm sure you share my commitment to maintaining the integrity of our training program." The diplomatic language contained an unmistakable message about command authority and proper procedures. After a long moment of tension, General Hawkins agreed to adjourn the debriefing session, but not before delivering a final warning to Sarah. "Martinez, this conversation is far from over. You'll be hearing from me soon." As the room emptied, Sarah found herself surrounded by her teammates and other recruits, who offered quiet words of support and encouragement. Jennifer approached with tears in her eyes, thanking Sarah for demonstrating the kind of courage she had never thought possible. Marcus shook her hand and told her that her leadership during the exercise had taught him more about being a soldier than all their previous training combined. However, Sarah knew that her confrontation with General Hawkins had created a situation that would have lasting consequences. She had essentially challenged the authority of one of the most powerful officers on the base in a very public setting, and she understood that such actions rarely went unpunished, regardless of their justification. The next few days would determine whether her stand had been worth the personal and professional risks involved. That evening, Sarah was called to report to Colonel Morrison's office for a private conversation. She arrived expecting another confrontation or disciplinary action, but instead found the colonel reviewing a thick file of documents with a thoughtful expression. When she entered and stood at attention, he gestured for her to sit down in a chair across from his desk. "Martinez, we need to have an honest conversation about what happened today and what it means for your future here," Colonel Morrison began. "But first, I want you to understand that your performance during the field exercise was genuinely exceptional. The training officer's reports, when stripped of the subjective commentary, show that you demonstrated leadership, tactical thinking, and team management skills that exceed what we typically see from recruits at your level." Sarah felt some relief at this acknowledgement, but she remained cautious about where the conversation was heading. "Thank you, sir. I tried to do my best under difficult circumstances." "That's exactly what concerns me," Colonel Morrison continued. "The circumstances were deliberately made difficult in ways that went beyond our standard training protocols. I've been reviewing General Hawkins's modifications to your team's exercise parameters, and I have serious questions about whether those modifications served any legitimate training purpose." The colonel opened the file in front of him and showed Sarah documentation that confirmed what she had suspected during the exercise. Team Alpha had indeed been subjected to significantly more challenging scenarios than the other teams, with evaluation criteria that seemed designed to create failure rather than measure competence. The evidence was clear and comprehensive, suggesting that Colonel Morrison had been conducting his own investigation into the training practices. "Sir, I suspected that our team was being treated differently, but I didn't want to make accusations without proof," Sarah said carefully. "I focused on trying to succeed regardless of the circumstances." That's exactly what makes this situation problematic, Colonel Morrison replied. You and your teammates succeeded despite being set up to fail, and then you were criticized for the very qualities that enabled your success. That's not consistent with our training objectives or our military values. Colonel Morrison explained that General Hawkins had been conducting what she described as enhanced evaluation protocols for female recruits, based on her theory that women required more extreme pressure to reveal their true limitations. However, these protocols had never been approved by higher command and appeared to violate several principles of fair and effective training evaluation. Martinez, I want you to know that your response to General Hawkins today, while risky, was not inappropriate given the circumstances, the colonel said. You stood up for yourself and your team when you were being unfairly criticized, and you did so with professionalism and dignity. Those are leadership qualities that we want to encourage, not punish. Sarah felt a surge of validation at this recognition, but she remained concerned about the practical implications of her confrontation with the general. Sir, I appreciate your support, but I understand that challenging a general's authority has consequences. I'm prepared to accept whatever disciplinary action is necessary. Colonel Morrison leaned back in his chair and studied Sarah carefully before responding. Martinez, what if I told you that there might be a way to turn this situation into an opportunity rather than a crisis? Your performance this week has attracted attention from beyond this base, and not all of that attention is negative. The colonel explained that representatives from the Pentagon's Military Leadership Development Program had been reviewing reports from various training bases, looking for recruits who demonstrated exceptional potential for future leadership roles. Sarah's file had already been flagged for positive attention based on her consistent performance, but her handling of the recent crisis had elevated that interest significantly. There are people in senior leadership positions who believe that the military needs officers who can think independently, adapt to challenging circumstances, and stand up for their principles even under pressure. Colonel Morrison continued, Your actions today demonstrated all of those qualities. And that demonstration has been noticed by people who have the authority to ensure that your career develops appropriately. S.A. listened with growing amazement as Colonel Morrison outlined possibilities she had never imagined. The Military Leadership Development Program included opportunities for accelerated advancement, specialized training, and assignments that could lead to significant leadership responsibilities much earlier in her career than traditional paths would allow. Her confrontation with General Hawkins, rather than ending her military career, might actually have opened doors that would otherwise have remained closed. However, the colonel also warned her that accepting these opportunities would require navigating complex political dynamics within the military hierarchy. General Hawkins still held significant authority and influence, and her opposition to Sarah's advancement would need to be managed carefully. The path forward would require strategic thinking and political awareness in addition to military competence. Sir, I'm honored by these opportunities, but I want to make sure I understand what's being offered and what would be expected of me, Sarah said thoughtfully. I came here to serve my country and to prove that people like me belong in the military. I don't want to become a political symbol or a test case for someone else's agenda. Colonel Morrison smiled at her response, clearly impressed by her maturity and awareness of the broader implications. Martinez, that attitude is exactly why you've attracted this kind of attention. You're focused on service and competence rather than personal advancement or political positioning. Those are the qualities that make great military leaders. The conversation continued for another hour, covering the specific opportunities available to Sarah and the timeline for making decisions about her future path. As she prepared to leave the colonel's office, Sarah realized that her confrontation with General Hawkins had indeed changed everything, but not in the way anyone might have expected. Instead of ending her military career, it had launched her toward possibilities that exceeded her original dreams. Walking back to her barracks that evening, Sarah reflected on the strange turns her life had taken in just a few weeks. She had come to boot camp hoping to prove herself worthy of serving her country, and she had ended up in a situation where senior military leaders were competing to offer her advanced opportunities. The irony was that her success had come not from avoiding confrontation, but from standing up for her principles, when it would have been easier to remain silent. As she entered the barracks, she found her fellow recruits waiting with obvious curiosity about her meeting with Colonel Morrison. Sarah realized that what happened next would depend not just on her own decisions, but on how she handled the responsibility that came with representing something larger than herself. The young woman who had arrived at Fort Jackson wanting to prove herself had become someone that others looked to for inspiration and leadership. The next morning would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but Sarah felt ready to face them with the same combination of determination, integrity, and courage that had carried her through every test she had encountered. Whatever General Hawkins planned to do next, Sarah now knew she had allies and advocates who recognized her true potential and were willing to support her development as a military leader. The next morning brought an unexpected development that would forever change the dynamics at Fort Jackson. Sarah arrived at morning formation to find that she had been temporarily reassigned from regular training duties to assist with a special evaluation program that was being conducted by a team of visiting officers from the Pentagon. The reassignment came with instructions to report to a different building on the base, one that housed administrative and strategic planning functions rather than basic training activities. As Sarah made her way across the base, she noticed that word of her confrontation with General Hawkins had spread throughout the installation. Other recruits offered nods of encouragement. Training officers gave her respectful acknowledgments. And even some of the base support staff seemed to recognize her as someone who had done something significant. The attention was both gratifying and uncomfortable, as Sarah had never sought to become the center of such widespread notice. The building where she was to report housed the offices of senior officers and visiting dignitaries, a significant upgrade from the basic training facilities she had become accustomed to. When she arrived at the specified office, she was greeted by Captain Lisa Chen, an intelligence officer who explained that Sarah had been selected to participate in a comprehensive assessment program designed to identify potential candidates for advanced leadership development. Martinez, your recent performance has attracted attention from several different departments within the military hierarchy, Captain Chen explained as they walked through corridors lined with photographs of distinguished military leaders. This assessment program will give you an opportunity to demonstrate your capabilities in environments that go well beyond basic training scenarios. The assessment program turned out to be unlike anything Sarah had experienced during her time in Bootcamp. Instead of physical challenges and weapons training, she found herself participating in strategic planning exercises, leadership simulations, and policy analysis activities that tested her intellectual capabilities and decision-making skills under complex circumstances. The other participants were a diverse group that included recruits from other bases, junior officers from various branches of the military, and even some civilian analysts who were being considered for military-related positions. During the first day of assessments, Sarah participated in a complex scenario that required her to develop a comprehensive response to a simulated international crisis. Working with a team of other participants, she had to analyze intelligence reports, develop strategic recommendations, and present their conclusions to a panel of senior officers who played the roles of government leaders. Her performance impressed both her teammates and the evaluating officers, particularly her ability to integrate different perspectives and develop practical solutions to complex problems. However, the most significant moment came during an individual evaluation session where Sarah was interviewed by General Rebecca Thompson, a two-star general who served as the director of the Military Leadership Development Program. General Thompson was known throughout the military as a fair but demanding officer who had been instrumental in developing many of the current generation of senior military leaders. Martinez, I've been reviewing your file and the reports from your recent training exercises. General Thompson began, her manner professional but encouraging. Your performance has been consistently exceptional. But what interests me most is your response to the challenges you faced with General Hawkins. Can you walk me through your thinking during that confrontation? Sarah took a moment to organize her thoughts before responding. She wanted to be honest about her experience without appearing to criticize the military institution or her superiors inappropriately. General Thompson, I felt that my team and I were being held to standards that seemed designed to create failure, rather than measure our actual capabilities. When those standards were presented as evidence of our inadequacy, I felt compelled to speak up for the truth of what had actually occurred. And you understood that challenging General Hawkins publicly carried significant risks for your military career? General Thompson continued. Yes, ma'am. I understood the risks, Sarah replied. But I also understood that accepting unfair treatment without protest would mean abandoning the principles of integrity and courage that brought me to military service in the first place. I decided that maintaining those principles was worth the personal cost. General Thompson nodded approvingly at this response. Martinez, that kind of moral courage is exactly what we're looking for in our future military leaders. The ability to stand up for what's right even when it's difficult or dangerous is essential for officers who will be responsible for making decisions that affect thousands of lives. The conversation continued for over an hour, covering Sarah's background, her motivations for military service, her long-term career goals, and her thoughts about leadership and military values. General Thompson asked probing questions that revealed both Sarah's intellectual depth and her emotional maturity, clearly assessing whether she possessed the qualities necessary for rapid advancement through the military hierarchy. During the second day of assessment, Sarah participated in a leadership exercise that placed her in command of a mixed group of participants facing a complex tactical scenario. The exercise was designed to test her ability to lead people who were her peers or even superiors in rank, a common challenge for young officers who were promoted quickly due to exceptional performance. Sarah approached the challenge by focusing on the mission objectives and the strengths of her team members, treating everyone with respect while maintaining clear command authority. The exercise culminated in a scenario where Sarah had to make a difficult decision that involved balancing mission success against the safety of her team members. Drawing on her experiences during the field exercise at Bootcamp, she chose a course of action that prioritized both objectives through creative problem-solving and careful risk management. Her solution impressed the evaluating officers and earned respect from her fellow participants, many of whom had significantly more military experience than she did. Meanwhile, General Hawkins had been conducting her own investigation into the events surrounding Sarah's confrontation with her authority. The general had requested access to all documentation related to Sarah's training and performance, apparently hoping to build a case that would support her negative evaluation and justify disciplinary action. However, her investigation had yielded results that were quite different from what she had expected. Colonel Morrison had been carefully documenting the irregularities in General Hawkins' training protocols for several weeks, working with the base inspector general to ensure that any investigation would be thorough and objective. When General Hawkins requested the files, she discovered that her own actions were under scrutiny, and that her treatment of female recruits was being evaluated by officers who outranked her and had the authority to investigate potential discrimination and abuse of authority. The investigation revealed that General Hawkins had been systematically subjecting female recruits to training scenarios that exceeded approved parameters, while simultaneously evaluating their performance more harshly than their male counterparts. The documentation showed a clear pattern of behavior that violated military equal opportunity policies and potentially constituted harassment based on gender. The evidence was comprehensive and damaging to General Hawkins' position and reputation. As word of the investigation spread through the base, the atmosphere began to change significantly. Training officers who had been implementing General Hawkins' enhanced protocols began to question whether those instructions had been appropriate. Female recruits who had been struggling under the artificially difficult conditions found that their treatment improved dramatically. Most importantly, the entire training program began to refocus on its original mission of developing competent soldiers, rather than proving ideological points about gender and military service. Sarah learned about these developments during a briefing with General Thompson on the third day of her assessment program. The general explained that Sarah's confrontation with General Hawkins had triggered a comprehensive review of training practices that had revealed systemic problems requiring immediate correction. Rather than being disciplined for insubordination, Sarah was being recognized as someone who had the courage to expose inappropriate practices when others had remained silent. Martinez, your actions have had consequences that extend far beyond your own situation, General Thompson explained. You've helped us identify and correct problems that were affecting numerous other recruits who didn't have the confidence or ability to speak up for themselves. That's the kind of impact we expect from our military leaders. General Thompson also revealed that Sarah's performance during the assessment program had exceeded all expectations, confirming that she possessed the intellectual capabilities and leadership potential to succeed in advanced military positions. The general offered Sarah several options for her continued development, including assignment to officer candidate school with accelerated advancement opportunities, specialized training in intelligence or strategic planning, or assignment to prestigious units that would provide exceptional learning experiences. However, the most significant development came when General Thompson explained that Sarah's case had attracted attention from the highest levels of military leadership, including officers who were responsible for developing policies about military training and equal opportunity. Sarah was being invited to participate in discussions about improving training practices and ensuring that all military personnel were evaluated fairly regardless of their background or gender. Martinez, you have an opportunity to influence military policy in ways that will benefit thousands of future service members, General Thompson said. Your experience and insights could help us create training programs that are more effective and more fair than what we have today. Are you interested in taking on that responsibility? Sarah felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered to her. She had entered boot camp hoping simply to prove herself worthy of serving her country, and now she was being asked to help shape the future of military training and leadership development. The opportunities were beyond anything she could have imagined, but they also came with responsibilities that would require her to grow in ways she had never anticipated. After careful consideration, Sarah accepted the opportunity to participate in policy development while also pursuing advanced military training. She understood that her unique experience and perspective could contribute to positive changes that would benefit other service members who faced similar challenges. Her decision meant that her confrontation with General Hawkins, rather than ending her military career, had launched her toward a future where she could have significant influence on military culture and policies. The final assessment session included a comprehensive evaluation of Sarah's performance throughout the program, conducted by a panel of senior officers who represented different aspects of military leadership. Their unanimous conclusion was that Sarah demonstrated exceptional potential for senior leadership positions and should be fast-tracked through advanced training and development programs. When Sarah returned to regular training duties for her final week of boot camp, she found that the entire atmosphere on the base had changed. General Hawkins had been reassigned to administrative duties, pending the completion of the investigation into her training practices. The enhanced protocols that had made training unnecessarily difficult for female recruits had been discontinued. Most importantly, other recruits were reporting that the training environment had become more focused on developing competence and leadership rather than breaking down individuals based on irrelevant characteristics. Sarah's fellow recruits treated her with a mixture of admiration and amazement, recognizing that her courage in confronting unfair treatment had led to positive changes for everyone. Jennifer, in particular, expressed gratitude for Sarah's willingness to stand up for principles that had seemed too dangerous for anyone else to defend. The young woman who had struggled with self-doubt throughout training had found new confidence, inspired by seeing someone successfully challenge authority when that authority was wrong. The graduation ceremony for Sarah's boot camp class was attended by several distinguished visitors, including General Thompson and other senior officers who wanted to recognize the exceptional performance of the recruits who had persevered through unusual circumstances. When Sarah's name was called to receive recognition for outstanding leadership, the applause from her fellow recruits, training officers, and visiting dignitaries created a moment that would be remembered long after the specific details of her confrontation with General Hawkins were forgotten. In her graduation speech, Sarah spoke about the importance of maintaining integrity under pressure and supporting fellow service members who faced unfair challenges. She emphasized that military service required courage, not just in combat situations, but in everyday situations where doing the right thing might be difficult or unpopular. Her words resonated with an audience that had witnessed the practical application of those principles over the previous weeks. As Sarah prepared to leave Fort Jackson for her next assignment, she reflected on how profoundly her life had changed since arriving at the base several weeks earlier. She had come seeking to prove herself worthy of military service, and she was leaving as someone who had already influenced military policy and earned recognition as a future leader. The journey had been more challenging and more rewarding than anything she could have anticipated. The young woman who boarded the bus leaving Fort Jackson was fundamentally different from the one who had arrived with hopes and determination, but uncertain about what she could achieve. Sarah Martinez had discovered that standing up for principles, even when it seemed dangerous, could lead to outcomes that benefited not just herself, but many others who lacked the courage or opportunity to speak for themselves. Her legacy at Fort Jackson would continue long after her departure, in the form of improved training practices, better leadership development, and a culture that valued integrity and fairness above conformity and intimidation. The general who had tried to break her had instead revealed her true strength, and that strength had silenced not just the base but critics throughout the military, who doubted whether young people from diverse backgrounds could succeed in leadership positions when given fair opportunities and appropriate support. Sarah's story became a powerful example of how individual courage could create systemic change, and how the military's best traditions of honor and service could triumph over prejudice and discrimination when someone had the courage to demand better.